Okay, everyone, we're here at what is now being called the Nightmare Press podcast. It's just a continuation of Frightening Floyd's podcast, so this is technically episode 6. My name is Jacob Floyd. I am co-owner of Nightmare Press, and I have with me today G.E. Moore. He is an author of several books, and he will have one soon released through Nightmare Press called BEALZ, Prince of the SOUTHSIDE.
Awesome.
So, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, man. I'm doing great. How are you?
All right. Thank you for coming on to the show, finding time, and sorry again about having to cancel last week.
Hey, life's things happen.
Life's funny like that, right?
Yeah.
All right. So I guess just starting off, tell us a little bit about yourself. Um, what you do and what brought you on this journey to begin writing.
All right. Yeah. This is some of the insanity that is me. I am G.E. Moore. It's Gary E. Moore. I am an Illinoisan. I'm currently residing in Chicago. I spent the biggest majority of my career. I've been in education for over 30 years. It's one of those things when I left college, I basically walked into a classroom and I was in there roughly straight through until the pandemic basically closed the schools down. And it was around that time, during that time, that I had to take stock, look around in my life. I was closing up on a milestone birthday. We were in the midst of this pandemic, this global shutdown, and I just had to really decide what was important for me. And as a poet, as someone who's written poetry and who's written fiction, short stories, and written essays, and I've been published since I was in my mid-20s, my early 20s. I decided that I needed to take stock and really focus on what was important, what was most important to me. And for me, that was the pursuit of art through the written word. So that's where I am right now.
I can certainly understand that. That's kind of my passion. I just posted a really long, unnecessarily long post on Facebook about the passion of writing.
Yeah.
So you started out, was poetry what you started out writing? I used to write that myself.
Yeah.
Well, about what type did you write? Did you write the non-rhyming or the rhyming type or both or what?
I started when I'm not going to say most people, but for certain, from my perspective, as someone who was completely unexposed to poetry, I wasn't certain what it was. I was introduced to it, and it's one of those really nice stories, these fairy tale stories where we had this wonderful English teacher, this wonderful literature teacher who recognized the struggling little black boy in her class and reached out to him. Well, it was true. I had an English teacher. I will never forget her name, Mrs. Lauderdale. She stays in my heart to this day. She urged me, she pushed me to explore my love of literature, of writing. And it's something that from where I was coming from, the environment that I was in, the type of people that I was growing up around, it was unheard of. It was nuts. What are you doing? But I did it. And I found that I loved it. I found that I was pretty good at expressing myself at it. So my initial poetry was those couplets, the rhyming words, but I eventually grew past that. I don't know, most of what I write anyway, subject matter wise, could probably be considered a little, I don't know, what's the word I'm looking for? Antisocial. I weave, in particular, especially in my poetry, I weave a lot of critiques of society and capitalist structures into my poetry.
I can certainly appreciate that. when I always wrote poetry, I always wrote the rhyming type too. I know a lot of people, they look down on that, but it's kind of like
Yeah.
my first influence into poetry was Edgar Allan Poe, and that's all he basically wrote was the type that
Yeah.
rhymed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Who,
Love Miss Poe.
yeah,
Yeah.
he had the rhymes down, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Who was some of the poets you liked in the beginning?
I was initially, when I was introduced to the idea of using poetry to express myself, I was drawn towards a lot of the Harlem Renaissance poets,
Mhm.
like Langston Hughes, um, County Cullen. So there's some of those early guys, and then I found I had a was another English teacher story. This time was in college. I was introduced to some of the classic poets like Coleridge
Mhm.
and Wordsworth. When I was in college, so I started reading more of the classical English poets. I love like those Harlem Renaissance poets.
Mhm.
Um, I even like some of the more modern poets that are coming out now. So my poetic style is all over the place.
Yeah, well, it's good to keep. It's good to keep. I think it's good to keep diverse styles going when you write anything.
Yeah,
You don't want to get stuck on one thing.
I agree.
So,
Agree.
right, you mentioned growing up in your environment. How has the environment you grew up in? I'm sure it influences everyone's work to a certain extent, and whether it be the poetry or the essays or the fiction, how do you feel like a lot of that's affected what you've decided to write and write about?
Yeah, yeah. Well, it certainly affected my perception. My view, the way I perceive things, and the way I process and dispense and receive of information. I see things from uh, an outsider's perspective. You know, society is set up in these capitalist structures, so it's easy to forget that we as individuals aren't necessarily supposed to be fitting into these particular boxes. We're not supposed to be checking off of these particular phenotypes, these characteristics. It's okay to see this thing as different, and I just could not conform. I've been chasing that my whole life. I've been dealing with it my whole life. Um, and I'm still struggling with these legal structures now. I I,
Mhm.
I can't find cause for conformity, and so that allowed me growing up to be and for me on the real, I was a weird kid walking around in the hood with a viola
Mhm.
with a strap on it so I could put it on my back in case I had to fight on the way home.
Yeah.
I was in the orchestra, but I was in a gang. This shit was weird. So, I just had to figure out a way to get by. And I think because things were so odd for me, just because I'd always been uncomfortable with conformity, it allowed me to be cool with writing, because writing and poetry, as you can imagine, it's not the things that you pull out and talk about at the party.
Yeah.
It's not going to make you popular at the party. So,
No, nobody
you know,
wants to talk about that, right?
you have to be, you have to really, at least for my sake, I really had to go out on a limb a little bit and tap into something that made the people around me uncomfortable in order to continue to find myself.
Yeah, yeah, I get it. Like I was always that nonconformist, not really fitting it. And and it's like I didn't try to be. It's just who I was. So
Right.
I totally understand where you're coming from. I knew someone who I knew a guy who lived in a very similar environment, and he was into all kinds of different artistic endeavors, and one of them was ice sculpting, and people thought he was really weird for it, but I thought he was cool, man. I like people who find different.
Absolutely.
Find
Absolutely.
what
We're dreamers.
what what caused you to start like going into from poetry to writing fiction, like more prose?
Yeah. Yeah. as I said, I self-identify, and my tagline is I am a poet, author, and a dad. So because I identify first and foremost as a poet, but my love of the written word is just as strong. It's in some way when I write long form, when I'm writing these long forms of fiction, I really do see it as an extension of my poetry. Um, but what's the dude's name? And we just had a warm spell here in Chicago, and the temps spiked up to 80 degrees. So I am sitting here with the windows open. So you might hear the traffic rolling by. But what's my guy's name? I was given a book of short stories by what's the dude that wrote The Great Gatsby?
F. Scott Fitzgerald.
F. Scott Fitzgerald. And for whatever reason, his name just like completely uh, vanished out of my brain. But I was given a book of his short stories, and that book in particular introduced me to the idea of conveying a particular idea, or I couldn't get over how the craftsmanship behind what he was doing, how he constructed his short stories, and it fascinated me, and I've been attempting my hand at it really ever since. I think the first real thing that I wrote was a weird play. When I told you about my English teacher, Ms. Lauderdale, she was pushing me towards. I was supposed to write an essay, and I ended up writing a play about Ronald Reagan and Gorbachev kicking off World War III, and she gave me an A for it. So I've been trying and dabbling ever since then.
At least she appreciated the creative flow.
Yeah. I appreciated that she did.
Yeah, she's like, this isn't an essay, but okay. You said a few things that I find really interesting, because here of late, over the last few years, there's this big movement in the writing community where people are constantly talking about, you're not what you write, and don't self-insert into your writing.
Yeah.
And you talk about F. Scott Fitzgerald, and even like his best bud Ernest Hemingway, and a lot of other authors. That was used to be the thing. You write what you know, right? And I think too many people try to stray from that, and it can be done very well, but I mean, like certain types of styles, I think it's good to stick to that, and that's I think is definitely I think it creates for a stronger voice.
I do. I believe so. I think it's important to be able to convey your voice, without worrying for how someone else may perceive it. Because, the fact of the matter is, some of the best stuff that I've ever read is something that was written from a perspective that was completely foreign to my own.
Right.
But,
yeah.
Good writing resonates with you regardless.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why it's good. I think that's why it's good to always keep the scope broad of what you want to read.
For sure.
Yeah, it's like I could read like F. Scott Fitzgerald, and then turn around and read Iceberg Slim, and then turn around and read Clive Barker. And then Toni Morrison.
And for me, I never understood, but I can see the purpose and the value and the through line that runs through all of those.
Yeah.
It connects very easily and very seamlessly for me, to be able to read The Grapes of Wrath. And like you said, then to switch over to Iceberg Slim.
Mm-hmm.
For me, it was Stephen King. I read like his whole catalog when I was in high school. Mm-hmm. So it was easy for me to switch between these genres and to be okay with it, and just to lose myself in the actual story.
Right. Yeah. Like I was just. At the same time, I just finished this book by Chinua Achebe. I think I got his name right. Things Fall Apart.
Yes.
At the same time, I was reading Pride and Prejudice. So I mean, how can you get? In one sense, it's like you got two entirely different things, but they're kind of like writing with the same, not the same purpose, but somewhat of it. Like Pride and Prejudice is a little more humorous, more satirical of that society.
Yeah,
But at the same time, it's people writing what they know and from where they came from.
yes.
So, and I think that's really, really cool. So tell us, all right. So when I first got your submission during our submission call for BEALZ, Prince of the South Side, I read that, just the synopsis alone, and I was like, well, this definitely sounds like something I want, because I want Nightmare Press to expand just beyond horror, and my whole purpose is to like the evolution of literature on the indie level is kind of like what I'm aiming for,
Yeah.
and I thought BEALZ would fit perfectly into that canon. So tell our watchers, whoever might be watching, about BEALZ.
Okay. All right. For sure. And first of all, thanks. I certainly appreciate that you've decided to invest your time into BEALZ, because it is a passion project of mine. It started, BEALZ, the concept itself is roughly about 10 years old. I began to write it for my son, who just graduated from high school. And I wanted him to be able to read about a character on the level of, and and I really hate using like comparisons, like it's like a Harry Potter kind of adventure, but it is. I did want him to experience the scope of a tale like that, told from his perspective, and just like a Harry Potter, or just like something in one of the kids' books, like the Maze Runner. Just it was a story that was that they could engage and connect with anyone who took the time to sit down and read it. So the basis, I wanted to give him that superhero, that missing father. So a lot of the things that these kids that, like, again, I told you I was actively working with kids. I spent most of my career working as what's called I was an alternative placement teacher, meaning that I taught the kids who behaviorally couldn't stay in their classroom. So I got, quote unquote, the worst kids in the building, who
I got shipped to school.
turned out to be the best kids. Yeah. So what?
I said I got sent to a school like that twice when I was younger. So
yeah.
I get it.
So I was one of the teachers in that environment, and I wanted something for these kids to be able to read and to be proud of, to see themselves in. And so that's the basis for the idea of what BEALZ is, and it grew into so much more than that. So you have the protagonist. His name is BEALZ, BEALZ. He is a young boy growing up on the south side of Chicago. Estranged mother. He's living with his foster parent. His father has been in prison for murder since before he was born, and given all of these mundane characteristics, this mundane atmosphere, I wanted to create something beautiful and magical, and so so every little kid's fantasy in that is, man, I really wish my dad would just like show up and swoop in and save everybody. And so I created a story basically along those lines. This kid discovers that he is actually descended from royalty, that there is another world altogether, right alongside our own, that his father was from. His mother is this powerful magical being, and so the story opens with a quest to bring all of these family members back together. So that's what BEALZ is. That's what that story is.
Yeah, I like it because you use, like, you find a way to create, like you said, this what seemingly mundane situation, right? I wouldn't call it mundane as much as it's everyday situation. And on one hand, you create this like, magical world, right? And then, but at the same time, the entire goal of that whole entire story is to kind of like fulfill that need with inside the younger people, or even people who are older who had childhoods like that, missing something, and to have it all come back together for them. And I think there's a lot to that story, and I really enjoyed it, and I think it would be a good addition. So I was glad you sent it in.
That's awesome. I'm glad you felt like that. For certain, it's been shopped around. It has been looking for a home. It did actually have a home. My first publisher, who actually published my debut poetry collection, was going to publish it, but they had some personals.
I think we froze up here. We have a little bit of technical difficulties here. Let's see. All right, so it looks like there was a little bit of a technical difficulty on GE's end. See if we can get him back in here. But as I'm corresponding with him, I would like to mention that, I think people will enjoy BEALZ. So when it hits, it should be coming out very soon, and I look forward to seeing what people will do with that. And I think a lot of things what G.E. Moore said, I would have to agree with. As far as being true to yourself and writing, it's something I've often spoke about against the idea. I mean, I get people say you're not what you write, in the sense that, meaning like, you write about bad people, you're not the bad people, you think they're bad, so that's why you're writing about them. But I mean, but to put the focus on something that in your life, and something that you've learned, and something that you think, something you've experienced, I think is very important to being in literature, so to speak. Oh, and GE's back.
All right, there we go.
Sorry about that. I don't know
That's
what
all
went
right.
on. I was on here rambling for a minute, waiting for you to get back. So, what was I saying? You were saying something. I don't even remember what we were saying before it went. Well, it looks like you froze again there, sir.
Talking about BEALZ.
Okay, yeah, we were talking about BEALZ. We were saying I was on a thought, and I think you were in the middle of answering that thought, and then it went down. Well, I will just say this. I think what you said, something about giving these kids something to read at these alternative schools, and something to make them feel more connected. And that actually is interesting, because like I mentioned, I was in schools like that when I was younger. Yeah. And actually that's where I discovered S.C. Hinton. Are you familiar with S.C. Hinton?
Yeah.
The writer of The Outsiders and all that.
Yes, yes. One of my favorite books, as you bring that up. Yeah, I love that book, Outsiders. I stole a nickname from that book. Some kids were calling me Soda Pop for a couple of years.
I guess that's better than being called Pony Boy, though.
Yeah.
No, yeah, those books, actually, I feel like for a long time, and maybe even still, there's always characteristics of Dallas Winston or the Motorcycle Boy in some character in one of my books, because Rumblefish and The Outsiders were the ones that
yeah.
But reading those books actually meant a lot to me while I was stuck in those schools, because not to go into any of my history, but I was having a bad time, and part of me liked being there, part of me hated being there, and just like reading those books. So I think, and maybe that resonated with me when I was reading parts of BEALZ, and maybe I sensed that, but I don't know.
Yeah, yeah,
I felt that connection.
yeah. So some of that DNA is certainly woven into BEALZ, So I can certainly see that.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say. I think there's not. You were talking about it's being shopped around. That was where I was going. You said it had been shopped around, and you said the publisher who was going to publish it had some kind of issues. I think that's where this cut off at.
Yeah. Okay.
And that's the thing. Like, I feel like, at least with small press and indie press and even big press, there's not a whole lot of that out there. Like, even with the magical realism type level, and especially the Afrofuturism, and I just don't feel like there's enough of that out there. And part of like what I wanted to do with Nightmare Press was give more authors voices that are being kept out because of what they wrote, because it's not easy for these small presses to sell. So, and
I appreciate that. I appreciate that you are open to to exploring, to be more accepting of more diverse literature, because some great stories, man. Beyond whether or not, and for me, it's important to convey that I am a Black man. I am writing about environments and about characters that I am familiar with, but these are universal themes.
right.
Anyone can pick this book up and enjoy it, regardless of who you are, regardless of what your background is. The purpose of the book is to appeal to everyone, to allow everyone to take a moment and ride along with these characters, and to see the world from these characters' perspective. And I think what literature does, what good writing does, is it allows it kind of like melts everyone down so that we can all like connect and see each other, and see the world from each other's perspective. So that it gives us a little better understanding of not just ourselves, but everyone around us, the people around us, and how we connect to them.
I agree, because at the end of the day, like, a lot of people look at the superficiality of it, like you said, about writing it from the Black man's perspective, where it's like it's written from the Black man's perspective. Harry Potter was written from a white woman's perspective, but we're all having the human experience,
Exactly.
and that's universal. And I think it's like I mentioned, things fall apart. When I was reading that, I was it's, of course, people who might not know what that book's about. It's about a tribe in Africa, in the lower Niger River Valley area, and reading about like their rituals and their customs. And I'm like, it's not all that different than what we see on like American television, and what we've been pushed as being the customs and values.
Yeah.
It's at the heart, it's the same thing. It's just the details are different. And I think that's like you said, that's what makes literature so great, because if people read it with an open mind, they realize that there's not the only difference in our experiences are the details.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. But you said earlier that we're all just living this. This is all, it's a human experience, man. Just trying to breathe our way through one day to the next.
Yeah, we're all trying to make it. And that's another thing too, like taking a chance with different sort of perspectives and different sort of literature. That's like, more than anything, that's what I want to do with what we're doing. And like the book we just released is a magical realism book, and it's doing really well. And there's not a whole lot of that out there. So it's like, I think opening doors for new voices and new authors, and just what they want to write about is just,
yeah. And it's cool that you provided a home for that.
I see a lot of people talk about it, but I don't see a whole lot of people doing it sometimes. And
it's these are small acts of rebellion on your part. You know, to think about this, about it in that aspect.
No,
This
it really is.
this is an act of rebellion, and in order to do that, in the face of like relentless pressure of the society at large, dude, you gotta be brave.
Yeah,
Gotta put on your big boy pants and get ready to go to war, because not everybody's going to be accepting of.
it's very true. Yeah, I've in my years in the writing community, I've fought many wars and many battles, and some of them I shouldn't have wasted my time with. A couple of them I probably started and didn't need to, didn't mean to, but I kind
Here's
of
what
did.
it is.
But it is what it is. I'm about as far from perfect as you're going to find in anybody you meet. So, but I try to do the best I can. But I was also explain. Would you like to explain a little bit about what exactly Afrofuturism is to people who are listening?
Sure thing. And what it is an acknowledgement that there is a large underrepresented uh, voice or perspective in the Afro real, well, not Afro real, is in the fantasy, in the realism community. Uh, you know, so Afrofuturism in particular is a genre that started to celebrate itself and the exploration of um, if you think of like an Octavia Butler.
Mhm.
I don't know if you're familiar with any of her work with the
I
parable
am.
of the sower.
Yeah.
Um, but these people are celebrating, these diverse science fiction based, these fantasy based stories that are told from a unique Afro um, perspective, African American or Afro. We're talking about the diaspora at large from an African perspective. So you get what you get is a surprisingly diverse and unique experience, because we're used to, we've grown up with the particular voice. We've grown up with a particular um, pattern, and humans are you know we fall for patterns. We're designed to acknowledge and to accept and to fall into patterns. So it's not always easy to recognize that we are stuck in a pattern, that we have been placed in a pattern, but to acknowledge that there are other prototypes, that there are other platforms out there to explore, and it takes you outside of that, and allows you to connect with a broader human perspective. So Afrofuturism it's not meant as a barrier. It's just meant as a descriptor of, you're going to step into this unique world that has been presented by a voice that hasn't been heard before.
Right.
So
It's essentially magical realism, but told from the African American Black
yeah, yeah,
perspective, and I think that's part of what makes it unique. As much as we say the human experience is all the same, like I said, all those details really add up,
right.
and I think that's really important. And that word alone, when you attach that to the to the submission, I was like, well, that already has my attention, so I want to read what this is about. And
Right.
the fact and the environment set in was interesting to me. So, and I thought this is something that people need to read. I think people need to see more of this sort of thing, and hopefully that will happen at some point, and
Oh
maybe
yeah.
this will be the start. So, Wayward Home for Retired Superheroes.
Yes.
That one's that one's
Yeah.
that one's gotten my attention too.
Yeah. That
What
was that's a fun title to me. I love that title. Yeah.
and what made you embark on that journey?
Um. So the Wayward Home for Retired Superheroes and More Astonishing Tales from the Hood is a short story collection. Again, we're talking about that perspective to understand where I'm coming from. I grew up a comic book fanatic.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times people ask me about my vocabulary and how most of my vocabulary came from reading comic books.
Right.
Stan Lee was a motherfucker. So my vocabulary expanded a lot because of my love of comic books. And again, we're talking about the perspectives here. So I've always wondered about what was going on in the everyday life of these people. We're presented with the fantastic stories of the alien invasions and them blowing up New York or whatever the case may be. But what happens after they blow up New York? What about the guys who had to come in and clean that shit up?
Right.
So there's a lot of the stories that I write in particular when I'm presenting them from that aspect. They're not about. They're about the people who occupy these worlds. Like Wayward Homes this story starts off. It's about like a CNA's journey, like a nursing assistant's journey, as he's delivering food to some of the retirees in the home. These retired superheroes, and then he crosses over into the Hall of Villains, where they're the retired villain. He's just a regular guy working in this retirement home, and so I just tell the story from his perspective, and so a lot of the short stories in my collection are just about people living in this world and trying to get by and trying to figure out how to live and survive in a world that's populated by, one story in particular, Devin the Super Dude. He contemplates why he has to live the life that he's living in a world where people are flying over his head like gods. You have to consider these things. So that's what Wayward Homes is. Again, I don't know if it's in me to write anything where I'm not poking fun at the establishment in some way.
Well,
But,
yeah. I think that's part of its charm, for one. But it's like, and also, like you said, I think for one, just the idea of writing a superhero story from a perspective of someone who's not a superhero, right there's interesting enough. But like what you said about this guy, he's like, why am I having to live the way I do when we got people in this world who can fly and people in this world who can lift stadiums?
Yeah.
That almost in some ways kind of goes back to your sort of against the anti-capitalist conformity model. And it's almost kind of like it seems like it would be somewhat of a metaphor for that. And like, people with great power who could do great things for people, for the regular guy, aren't doing it. And
you can absolutely shift that template from the fiction into reality. Where we live in a world where we do have the real world, the grounded equivalent of a Tony Stark.
yeah.
He's fucking nuts.
Yeah.
So what do we do? In that aspect, how are we supposed to, process all of this stuff? We're living in a metaphysical in reality right now.
Yeah, that's true. We are, and I think, well, and honestly too, you're pretty sure you gained a lot of influence from reading Stan Lee, not just on your vocabulary, because that's kind of what he did too. I mean, that whole Marvel universe, a lot of it was a shifted template. Like there was a lot of like reflection of real world problems,
Yes,
but
yes.
put in a very metaphysical, supernatural, whatever you want to call the superhero genre, just in that way that people could enjoy it more than just being like, oh damn, my life sucks. They can read, instead of just being angry, they could read about a creature who was so angry he could destroy civilizations with his bare hands. And but him being on the side of the good guys, but showing that there's always somebody there who can counteract him if need be. Someone like Thor or somebody like that.
Yeah.
So I think that all comes around to a pretty interesting perspective of life and in general. Now, you said you wrote some essays in the past too. I'm assuming that a lot of those probably are along the same lines. If you'd like to talk a little bit about those.
I was a menace to my small town newspaper, among other places. But yeah, I had a regularly published essay in back in my hometown, and I have certain publications spread around, written essays, and all of them tend to be based around the same subjects. I read one to my fiance yesterday, and the opening line was, "I really want to punch Daniel Tiger in the face."
That's a great opening line.
It's hard to come back to win the audience back when that's your opening line, but I try my best with that one.
Yeah, I think you'd really get along with one of our other authors named Coyote Wallace. You guys would probably make good friends because he's always sticking the finger to the establishment. He writes dispatches and stuff like that.
Yeah. I've seen his. He's got a release out, right? They have a release out, right?
He's that's the Magical Realist book I was talking about.
Yeah. Very cool cover. I want to check it out.
Yeah, the cover artist did a great job. I want to know a little bit more. I haven't had a chance to really look deeply into it. I want to know a little bit more about the What Daddy Do and What Mama Do series.
Okay. Yes. Those were actually the backstory. The two children's books, and I wrote those right just at the start of the pandemic. I think that I've been home. I think my school had closed down it had been closed down for about a month or so, and so right around that time is when I first got hooked up with my first publisher, and we were working on a book of poetry. Excuse me. We were working on my poetry collection, and one of the poems in that collection is titled "What Daddy Do," and the title comes from a question that my then 4-year-old son asked me as I was standing in a bedroom, in his 4-year-old speak, what daddy do? And it just struck me. And it became a poem that eventually became, I saw it, I envisioned it as a children's book. Had no idea what to do with it, how to create it, but I did know like the super cool graffiti artist that I'd grown up with.
Mm-hmm.
And I reached out to him, and over the course of the next couple of months, I worked with this dude, and we worked together, and we created this really cool children's book, this children's book series. The first book is What Daddy Do, and the second one is What Mommy Do. I created, as a matter of fact, a workshop, a children's workshop that I present in local elementary schools, and I've actually done it at some public libraries where I give out copies of the book, and I talk to the kids about the creative process, and I have them, amongst other things, they'll act out scenes from the book, and we'll discuss like family dynamics, and I have planned a series of books with exploring different family members. So the first two, like I said, is What Daddy Do, and then I have What Mommy Do. The script is written for What Uncle Do and What Auntie Do. But I also want to include like more diverse families in this lineup eventually also. So that's my children's book series, and like I said, I do present it as a workshop. and it is presented as a workshop for kindergarten, first grade, and second grade students.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah, because when it was hard to find some of your work on because there's so many Gary Moores and GE Moores on there. It's hard to find. And then, but I did eventually find those books, and I didn't get a chance to. I looked more at the Wayward Home Superheroes one, but I just I thought they looked very interesting.
All right, right on.
Now you said something about being a menace to your paper.
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
Do you that kind of that? I mean, I'm assuming you wrote with some fiery passion probably into those essays, because most people do, especially when they're giving a finger to the establishment.
Yes.
How much? I know you said that you combine the environment for your fiction. How much of that sort of like anti-establishment passion kind of helps you write your fiction books as well?
It's a big part of it. It's a big part of it. And again, it's one of those. I want to shine light on underrepresented voices. Everything in this society is just so loud, and it just drowns out so much reason and logic and understanding is drowned out by just this constant noise. So I just wanted to introduce common sense, man. The way I look at it. I ran away from politics several years ago. As if my ass was on fire. I had to get back into the insanity of it all. It was really affecting my mental health. And when you step back and approach things with reason and understanding and compassion, it becomes clear. But I just couldn't not say anything in that aspect. There was a time again, when I say my small town, I grew up I was born and raised in Central Illinois. And, for a time there, I was a poetic darling. I was invited by the city to read at city events. I was commissioned to write original poetry by the city. A lot of the community organizations, they wanted me to come in and speak, but then I think they actually started to listen to what I was saying. So I got completely blackballed in that community. But you have to be willing to stand firm on what you believe, man. Especially when for me, it's simple. It's about compassion, human compassion. If it doesn't make sense, it's easy to identify. Let's just stop hurting people.
That's kind of my philosophy. I can identify with that because I used to be always raging on about the political climate in America and all this stuff. And you're right. All it does is just damage your mental health. And you get around people, and even if you agree with their politics, I've found for myself, I've been surrounded by people that even when you agree with their politics, like just the way they allow it to manifest is just sometimes it's so disgusting. Like I've seen people, and I had it most since I got online and started dealing with a lot of other authors, but I just see them, and it's like I would see them post beliefs, and I'm like, yeah, I believe that, but the way they would go about it was just like they would attack anybody that would like not believe just every little detail, agree with them on every little detail, and even try to have a conversation with them about it. And they would just they would launch into these campaigns of like insulting people, trying to destroy their reputation.
It's a really weird space to be in, man.
Yeah, and it's just like I used to get angry, but then I realized that a lot of those people, they're miserable, and that's why they're doing it. And because they can't, like you said, look at it from objective reasoning, compassion. and try to understand, why do people believe what they believe? Well, let's figure it out instead of making assumptions, and I would think that people I would think that people who are into writing and into literature would have that perspective a whole lot more often than
Right.
they do.
Right. I always make that assumption, and I've been burned several occasions because of it. Because as you said, as a writer, or as an artist in general, some of the community of people that I deal with, I deal with visual artists, filmmakers. But when you're dealing with creatives, my expectation at least, is that they're going to be a lot more open-minded.
Yeah. You would think they would be more understanding of the human condition and
Yeah.
the human perspective, because we're supposed to, as writers, I can't speak to being anything to do with film, because although I like film, I've never worked with any of it, but I imagine it's not any different. It's just a different approach. But as a writer, you create characters and you're supposed to try to understand
Yeah.
your characters. And I know to like maybe people who don't write, that sounds nuts, because they're like, well, you make up the characters in your head. What are you talking about? Understand them, but they do come alive.
Yes, they are. Yeah.
Because
Yeah. It's a whole thing.
they unlock pieces of your subconscious that you may not be wholly aware of, and just because you're constantly absorbing everything around you day in and day out, and somewhere in your mind it sticks, even if you can't remember it in the front. So like when you start creating characters, I think that all starts opening up, and
Yeah.
you would think people who deal in that wouldn't be so quick to shut other people down, and they would try to be like, hey, this person's a human being, they're flawed, they're not right about everything, or I'm flawed and I'm not right about everything, so let's just listen to each other. So yeah, 100%. And I think uh, now go back to your teaching background. This kind of brings me back to that perspective. You have to have that perspective to be an effective teacher, I think, because you're dealing with so many different people. So again, any people that you met during your any students you had during your days of teaching, did they ever kind of like challenge that, or like?
Sure thing. I credit my students with directing my evolution, my growth. Because you said they challenge as a teacher. When you're dealing with, in order to be an effective teacher, it's so important to be accepting and non-judgmental towards like an array of perspectives, an array of different life choices. It's so important to be able to accept that, and to make these kids feel accepted and not judged in that, because they're coming from environments where they're kids, so they really have no control over the environment that they're coming from. They have no control over what their what their home environment is. So as a teacher, it was important for me, especially as someone who spent so much time. If I wasn't, and this wasn't the entire time I was a teacher, but for a good 85% of my time as an educator, I worked with alternative placement students or special needs students. And it's just so important to create an environment for these kids to be able to walk in and know that they're on the same footing as every other kid who's sitting in the room with them. And man, I came across some indelible characters, some kids who I'll never forget. And so yeah, they most definitely shaped my perspective. One of the things so it was like notable. I did not know growing up that there was a such thing as poor white people. As crazy as that sounds.
Well, it's because they're all on TV, have money. Especially,
Yeah.
I imagine you were probably a teenager in the '80s, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's all that was on TV was like well-to-do white people.
I had no idea that there was, and there still is, like a massive class of working class or poor whites in this country.
Yeah, they're
And
all over Kentucky out
it's
here.
just almost as if the powers that be don't want us to come to that
No, they don't.
recognition. They don't want us to acknowledge that. So working with these students, I had to really like come in and shift my perspective about how they're all treated, how they're all handled. You know, how do I interact with each of these kids on the level that they need me to interact with them? Because like I said, I didn't know. I didn't know that it was that they were dealing with the same issues that I was dealing with as I was growing up. And I think it's important in some ways to keep these perspectives separate. They don't want poor white kids to know that they're dealing with the same issues as poor black kids. You know, God forbid that they get together and try to do something about it.
And that's it. And that's the point. And that's what I was going to say. That's they want to keep us poor and working class people divided any way possible.
Yes.
That's what it's all about. It's keeping. I've always said, while there's all kinds of bigots in the world in America, I don't think their motivations are all driven with bigotry towards necessarily misogynist, racist, homophobic. What they want to do is, and of course they're out there, but their main goal is to keep the poor fighting and the working class fighting, so no new generational wealth ever happens.
Exactly.
They want to keep us all as wage slaves is basically what it
That's
is.
the truth of it. That's the truth of it.
And it's sad. And yeah, that's always been that's like where I've always been coming from. I've always tried to fight and get people to realize that, like, hey man, we're all the ones trying to plug the holes in the boat, while the person who owns the boat, they're sitting on the shore watching their boat go down. They're just watching us build bigger boats for them, and it's like, it's just they don't. It's just, it really is an us as a certain class more than anything, and that's, I think you're absolutely right. Well, anything else before we go? We're almost out of time that you would like to add. Anything you want to plug or mention real quick?
No, you can go. A lot of my stuff is available for sale on Amazon. I am a working artist. I'm a vagabond. So, whatever pennies you toss my way, I greatly appreciate it. But no, I'm looking forward to our working relationship. I'm glad that my work found a home with you and your press, because I really do like your philosophy, and I appreciate that someone with your voice is behind it. I'm looking forward to what it becomes.
Yep, I am too, and I appreciate that. And hopefully we'll get a lot done over the years. I got a lot to do. So
That's what's up.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you for stopping in, and we'll look forward to having BEALZ out as soon as we possibly can get.
All right. That's what's up, man. All right, dude.
Thank
All
you.
right.
Have a good
All
one.
right, my man. Deuces.